My name's Patrick Else. I'm the National IQC lead for Nuffield Pathology. I'm also the quality manager at Leeds Nuffield Hospital, and I'm a specialist BMS at Leeds Nuffield Hospital. So I'm talking to you today about how I've used Randox Acusera 24/7 on a practical basis in the lab, and also to manage 13 separate hub sites. I think we've been with Randox, I think it's from about 2017 now, it might be 2019. Anyway, it's been a fruitful partnership, shall we say. So, as I said, I'm the quality manager at one of the UK's flagship hospitals. As part of my QMS duties, I have to make sure that the lab conforms to both ISO 15189 and MHRA requirements, and this is across the disciplines of microbiology, histology, blood transfusion, haematology and biochemistry. In my role as internal quality control lead, I'm responsible for the design and implementation of a national IQC strategy and providing support for 13 hub laboratories, each of which have their own spoke labs as well, which are interfaced into the overarching QMS. So from the lab side, we use Randox for our IQC and our EQA, and we also use their data management program, Acusera 24/7. This is used to perform IQC analysis on a number of platforms, primarily Roche Cobas, Sysmex, XT, XN, and XS full blood count analyzers, Apache series, Fuji Dry Chem, and we also have the Sysmex CA for coagulation. So the business entered a contract with Randox to provide all this. So they provide the bulk of the IQC and the EQA material directly, which greatly aids the process when it's linked in with their Acusera 24/7 program. So the main features of Acusera is that it's a web-based platform. So this means that you can access it from anywhere, any web browser. So you don't have to be physically in the lab to review QC results. This is, as I said, extremely beneficial if you're managing multiple sites. It allows me to review QC results from any of the 13 hub sites that I'm responsible for. And each laboratory account has the analyzers for that site linked, which allows for a high degree of flexibility. So each account that's set up is set up to a particular location with particular analyzers linked to that account. This allows for a great degree of flexibility, and it also allows control of access. For example, analyzers can be viewed only by staff members who have access to that account. What this means in practical terms is that, for instance, if I've got people that are working in Newcastle, they don't need to see the QC results of what's happening in London, so they're just limited to what they see for their account. I have overarching responsibility, so I have access to every single account, so I can keep an eye on what's going on a broad spectrum across the country. Once you've set up an account, each individual may also have their access custom designed. Again, this allows for control, so you could have more junior members of staff that can review QC but not necessarily change any of the data in the background, or you can have your higher specialist BMSs who need access to change lot numbers and analyzers and tests and rules. They can have that access as well. So by doing that, you're limiting people making mistakes in the system, which can then cause trouble further down the line. So the accounts are like that. So once you're in, you use these drop-down menus, and you've got the options: view, create, update, delete, and then you can just tick the boxes for each individual person. There are some that are already pre-populated, some users. So you've got a user, you've got an admin, you've got a manager. I found it easy to just use custom and tailor it to each individual requirement. That way I know who's got control of what and who hasn't. Another nice feature of the program is the graphical representation of the QC results. So this forms, the QC results drop in and form a Levy-Jennings plot. On this graph, you can directly comment onto each specific data point, which allows for an effective audit of the IQC review and also can provide evidence for troubleshooting. You can do statistical analysis of trends with some of the reports and from the graphs themselves. So you can look over time and see where your QC is trending to, where it's coming from. You can pick up if there's been issues such as wrong lot number put on the analyzer. The graphs can be generated for specific time periods, so you can narrow it down to 1 or 2 days, or you can look at 2 or 3 months, or when you get assessed, you can pull up a year's worth of data for your friendly assessor to look through. You can also generate graphs for all the levels of QC together, which is extremely useful and minimizes time when reviewing QC first thing in the morning, as you can just eyeball straight down and find out if anything's failing. So the software also allows for creation of what we call panels. So this is where you can group different tests together. So you could have an LFT panel, an immunoassay panel, hematology panel. It is of immense benefit is these panels, because without them you can end up having to review, I don't know what, 60, 70 graphs at a time, which is obviously time consuming, when really you might only need to be looking at 1 or 2 different assays. You can look at the assays individually if you wish, but I do find that these panels are a great time saver for all staff members. You can also arrange these panels into test by frequency. So for example, if you're running your ISEs and you need to QC them 4 times a day, then you could just make up an ISE panel. And then when it comes to reviewing these graphs, you would just have your ISE analytes, such as sodium, potassium chloride. So again, this saves time, because instead of having to pull through data from 60, 70 tests to make a graph, you just pull in your 3 that you need, which minimizes the time that you're actually spending reviewing your QC results. It also allows you to create what we call events. So these are times where it will put a line on the graph, and it'll indicate that you've had some maintenance done, or calibrations, or a change of lot number. I mean, essentially it's free text, so anything that you want to write in, you can put in. This is then imposed on your Levy-Jennings plot. So you've got a permanent record of which maintenance were carried out when, which calibration were carried out when. Again, this is a great benefit if you're troubleshooting, as it allows an instant determination of things that may have impacted your QC results, such as a reagent lot change, such as a failed calibration, such as a PMI visit. So the data can be generated on the graph, which is on the right, or in a tabular form, which is on the left. Both are beneficial. You can comment on your data points from either side. I personally find that the graphs are the quickest and easiest way to review QC on a daily basis, and I find the tabulation form the best way to look at troubleshooting QC. And as I mentioned, you can group them all together. So this graph here is showing APTT and PT across 3 levels. On the left-hand side, the SDIs. So you can quickly have a look and see if anything's breaching your 3 SDI limit. In this case, nothing is. So I know that the QC is good for the day, so I can run. I can tell my staff members that they can start processing the coagulation. And then later on, when the urgent work's been done, we can go back into each individual test and then have a look for any Westguard breaches that require any action or commenting on for trend and tracking. They also have a selection of multi-rules that are from Westguard. These are actions using a toggle button, and essentially they allow you to set your rules for your laboratory however you want it. We usually set them to alert or reject. It's nicely color coordinated, so anything that would come up as an alert would be yellow. Anything that comes up as red as reject would be red. Obviously, if it's a reject rule, you shouldn't be processing samples, so you'd stop and troubleshoot. These actions again can be placed directly onto the data point on the graph to maximize efficiency, and also again help with your tracking and trending, and help with any investigations into troubleshooting failed QCs. So practically, initially I began with obviously the daily review of QC performed by the BMS staff, and then on a weekly basis I would go through the QC results and actions that have been recorded. Generally over time everybody's obviously got more experience with the system, so I've reduced this weekly review to a monthly review, and then I do the tracking and trending for the whole country from these monthly reviews. So I receive reports from each hub site, which is generated by the program. The main reports I receive is statistical analysis report. This provides monthly and cumulative data, including mean, SD, and CV, and peer data is also included, which again can help if you've got a problem with a particular analyzer. It's easy then to determine whether it is just one individual analyzer or whether it's every analyzer that you've got across your network, whether the problems are appearing across it all. And then the other one I get is the exception report. I asked for this exception report because it collects all the results for a particular analyte, and then it determines the percentage of IQC failures within determined SD ranges. So we've set these at 3 SD, as the normal percentage of results failing at this will be around 0.3%. So we evaluated and determined that obviously you are going to get some failed QC results. Things do happen, you do get random events. So we worked on a limit of 10%. So anything that shows greater than 3SD results over 10% of the tests of the month, then we'd have a look at that in a bit more detail and determine whether anything's going wrong or whether it is just random error and due to reagent lot changes, calibrations, temperature, mechanical errors, everything that you normally expect in your laboratory. I found that this has worked well across all sites, as it does instigate people to look a bit more closely at why they might be getting so many failed QC results, and if there is things that can be put in place to try and minimize it. So when we get a new QC lot number, we generate our own data specific to this to each analyzer. This data then allows for any inherent biases and errors that's applicable to that individual system. ISO 15189 specifies that laboratories generate their own data to allow them to calculate their own independent limits, as some suppliers from experience have unnaturally large limits. This might be in order to cover the wide range of analyzers and suppliers that are the target market. I mean, one example of this was some IQC material for a full blood count analyzer. The manufacturer's limits were set at an SD of 30. So this means that when you multiplied up to get your 3 SD limits, it gave a tolerance level of the mean plus or minus 90. When we applied our own SD, this came out at 11. So conversely, our limits was the mean plus or minus 33. If you were using the manufacturer's suppliers, then obviously a failed QC on that magnitude would actually be 30 SDs away from where it should be. So our limit was 133 or 77. So by the time we would fail using the manufacturer's limits, we would be up to possibly 89 away from the mean, which would still flag as acceptable. However, with our own limits, that would be a failure of 8 SDs, which is unacceptable performance. So there is a process that we use to validate new lot numbers. Again, this has been designed looking at best practice, looking at various accreditation requirements, and also in conjunction with other staff members of Nuffield. So the two types of IQC that we use are generally, the majority of them are produced by Randox. These QCs are then pre-populated into the system. The non-Randox QC, which we don't use much of, to be honest, you can create these in the custom lot tab, whereby using you enter your lot number, your lot name, expiry date, your type, and then you pick your analytes and your instrument, save it, and then it just needs mapping, and everything goes across as it should. So as I said, we generate our own target values. So initially we run 20 consecutive aliquots for each level of QC. These results are added to Acusera 24/7, where the mean SD and CV are calculated. This SD is then entered into the intra-precision field on 24/7. This value represents the random error of the system. We also keep an initial recording of these values as a hard copy. The SD is multiplied by 3 to determine upper and lower limits for each particular assay. The reason we do keep a hard copy is just in case of any IT issues whereby we can't actually access the internet. Obviously, if we can't access the internet, we can't access 24/7. So by keeping your initial validation data, you do have some limits to work with when you're running your QC, so you can quickly check against what your original validation was to determine whether your results are in or out, while you wait for your IT people to catch up with the web browser. I'll be honest, we've not had to use it since we went on to 24/7. We did have instances previous to 24/7 with a system that was hard built into one of our LIMS capabilities, and sometimes that would crash and you couldn't access it. So, but from Randox, we've not really had anything where we've had to stop and start going through paper copies and ticking off to determine whether QC is in or out. If we do have any problems in the morning when we log on, initially we just send an email to the QC operations team, and generally we'll get a reply back in a couple of minutes saying they've had a look, everything's rebooted, should be able to access it, and that's been the case. So once we've done these 20 values, we then assess them against the upper and lower level which we've generated to ensure that they all are within the limits. If a value exceeds either limit, we then remove this out of the data. The SD is recalculated, and if required, subsequent runs will be performed to ensure the statistical validity of the data is viable. By convention, 20 values is deemed as the minimum for valid statistical analysis. So once we've done this initial 20 value run, that's what we call our intra-precision run. We then do an inter-precision run, which is processing the new QC alongside the current QC as normal routine procedure, i.e. at the beginning and at the end of each shift, again until a minimum of 20 samples has been run. This data is then reviewed using the same process as above, and this data will represent the systematic bias of individual assays. This process usually takes between 10 and 20 days. We don't normally have a problem with any of this. We normally get our lots way in advance of when the old lot's going to expire. So it's just a case of doing the workup, assessing the data, making sure it's all valid, and then that can get just put straight into our 24/7 system. The random and systemic error is then manipulated and generates your measurement of uncertainty, which ISO again is quite keen on. So you need both sets of error in order to generate your measurement of uncertainty. So the systemic error is basically a cumulative SD that's going to work. So each time you're running your QC, it's recalculating the SD, the mean, and the CV, and it's this recalculation of the cumulative SD that identifies your systemic error, whereas your initial 20 value shows your random error. So the software calculates uncertainty of measurement, and it can be generated in a report. So this means that you can have it to hand whenever anybody requires it. So ISO also recommends the use of third-party IQC materials. So this is material that is provided by a company that is independent from the manufacturer of the analyzers on which it is to be used. This negates any inherent biases from the company providing the analyzer. Simply put, it removes the possibility that the IQC being carried out is optimized for a particular analyzer. the third party, in essence, has no vested interest on whether the QC performs better on one analyzer or another. Randox satisfies this role well as a true third-party provider of both IQC material and the EQA material that our laboratories use. All of this then comes down to troubleshooting. Ultimately, we all work in laboratories. We all understand that things do go wrong, and it's prudent to be able to troubleshoot effectively, especially for your time management. You don't want your staff members spending all day trying to figure out if there's something wrong or whether there isn't anything wrong and then what to do about it. Ultimately, we're here to process samples for diagnostic testing. Obviously, there's patients at the end of that testing. You don't want to be holding your results up if you can help it. So EQA and IQC from Randox allows us to troubleshoot effectively in most scenarios. And a lot of this is done by tracking and trending. So essentially, the effective analysis can highlight issues. We look at EQA and IQC. So EQA provides a thorough overview of an analyzer's performance against known targets. If an issue arises with EQA, then the first place to look at is the IQC for that test on that day that the EQA was run. This is easily done using the Levy-Jennings plots. As I said earlier, you can put in a specific date range. So if you know the date that you ran your EQA, you can just look at the results for that day. And if your results are fine, then it might be that it was showing an alarm, such as a warning or a trend, or even if it had failed, but someone still run the EQA, it might have been that it's the last day, deadline submission day, so it gets run anyway. The event function also can be used when looking at this, because obviously if you've just calibrated all your tests on that day when you run your EQA, there may be something in the calibration that's not worked effectively, that's thrown out all your results that are coming off. It could be that you've changed a lot number and got lot to lot variation. Again, it's extremely easy to find all this information through 24/7. It's a lot easier than going through reagent record sheets and trying to track who put what on when, whether there's a time with it or not. All that's recorded in 24/7. If you as soon as your data point goes in, it's tagged with the time, the date. So it's definitely easier to find things. So the analysis of both IQC and EQA can highlight issues at different concentration levels. So this can be used to determine if an issue is likely to affect clinically significant results and impact upon patients. So really what we're saying here is that if you can highlight that you've got a problem at the high end of an assay, then if your clinically significant target is at the high end, then obviously you've got a problem. If it was at the low end, I mean, I'm thinking top of my head CRP. Obviously, if we're looking at CRP, we're looking for raised CRP. So if I've got a problem on a CRP level of less than 3, then I'm not really going to be that worried about it, because ultimately all our results are going to go out as less than 3 anyway. If it were up at the 200 level, then that's when I'd be worrying, because obviously if I'm sending out results that are high CRP greater than 200, but I know my QC's failing or my EQA's shown that I've got a problem at that end, then that does need evaluating and dealing with properly. Ultimately, I've looked at my IQC and I've adapted the way the laboratory works. So ultimately, we've gone from a reactive manner to a proactive manner. So what I basically mean by that is that through effective tracking and trending of your QC results and EQA results that are bi-monthly, you can understand the trends that are building before they become significant. So that means that you can put steps in place to minimize your analyzer downtime. So for example, I will review my QC and I will start looking at where I'm going to be getting trending rules. So if I've got 10x breaches or 7T breaches, if they're moving away from the mean in a in a positive or negative manner, but they're starting to pass through 1 SD and 1.5 SD, 2 SD, 2.5 SD. It's not going to be long before they're breaching 3 SD, and at that point, I'm going to have to stop running that test. So what I've put in place now is that if you notice that you've got a trend developing and it starts to get up to 2 SDs, at that point, calibrate. Don't wait until you get a failed QC because you can't run any results. So ultimately, how that'll work day to day is that in the morning we will have a look and we'll be saying, ALT showing a bit of a positive bias. So at some point through the day, usually around dinner time when the volume of samples has dropped off a bit, I will get someone to quickly calibrate the ALT, quickly run a bit more QC to make sure it's passed. And then that way we can continuously produce as ALT results rather than getting to a point where suddenly ALT fails and then we're having to phone clinicians to say that they can't have their ALT results just yet because we're in the middle of troubleshooting and we can't run any until we've done all that. So that's what I mean by a proactive manner. So essentially you're trying to head off any situations that might arise before they arise. So yeah, because ultimately, like I say, we're looking, the business we're looking at is to provide results to these clinicians in as timely manner as possible, to aid with treatment, to aid with monitoring of situations such as diabetes, things like that. So ultimately, I mean, anybody who's worked in a laboratory will know there's nothing worse than having to deal with a consultant who's ringing up wanting his urgent U's and E's, and you can't give him his urgent U's and E's because your analyzer's down, because it's failed QC or it's had a poor EQA return. Ultimately, using 24/7, you can head a lot of that off before you even get to that situation. So to summarize, I've found it to be an invaluable tool to maintain control over 13 sites with multiple platforms, and I can't stress enough how easy it is to do that with this system. I essentially have 13 accounts that I can log in and out of for each site. Each one of them has got each analyzer at that site. So if I know that there's something not right in Brentwood, for instance, or I get phoned up by the QM in Brentwood asking for advice, I can quickly go in. I can go through the program and I can highlight the problem that they're finding. So if I get phoned up saying we're having trouble with all as LFTs, I can quickly find all the results for all their LFTs over a certain time period. I can find out the events that's been going on. I can look at what's been commented on. I can find out whether they've been effectively troubleshooting or whether it's just been left, just repeat QC, repeat QC, repeat QC until it's in, which is not the best way to do things. And ultimately, without 24/7, I wouldn't be able to do that. It would take me a hell of a lot longer. I'd probably be asking for spreadsheets sending over with data on that I'd then have to sit and go through with a fine-tooth comb. The software is extremely user-friendly. I've got a couple of technophobes working for me who even they've managed to use the system quite well. I've not really had any problem. They're constantly reviewing and upgrading the system. The correspondence that you get with Randox is first rate. Generally, there's a few individuals that I will email. There's also the QC operations team, and they get back to you quickly. And if there's any upgrades coming out, they tend to put out material telling you what's been upgraded, how it's going to affect it, if there's going to be any significant changes. They will also let you know when the upgrade is going to happen, because for that period of time, for a short period of time during that day, you might not be able to access it as they switch over from one version to another, but it's never been a problem. It's never been, they don't do it when you need it, let's put it that way. They tend to pick a decent time of day when they're going to switch over, so it's not first thing in the morning when everybody's trying to get the QC off, or last thing at night when everybody's trying to get QC off. The reports that they generate, as far as I'm aware, have satisfied all accreditation requirements. When we got UCAS assessed the last time, we were 13 individual numbers. We've now amalgamated to one number, and a big part of that was that they wanted to see that there was a national strategy for IQC. I designed it in line with using Randox. I submitted the reports that I expect to get from the quality managers in the various hubs. I submitted the reports I make from that. I submitted how I track and trend, and they were very pleased with how it was being managed, and again, all that is because of the ease with 24/7 and how user friendly it is. It's very easy. The reports are invaluable from my point of view. Again, you can pick them for certain time periods, so you don't have to wade through a year's worth of data to find 2 weeks worth. You can just put that 2 weeks and it'll generate that report. There's a user manual on the website, which is again very user friendly. It's very direct, full of screenshots, tells you where to go, what to do, which buttons to click, what you can do, what you can't do, and that's obviously updated frequently. I did initially print one off to keep with our quality management system, but it got updated that often that it soon became apparent I'd be better just putting a hyperlink in place so that people can access it should they need it. But there is a tab on the screen just that opens it up anyway. Again, the support from Randox is first rate. When we first initially started, it was a big job to look at these 13 hubs and try and figure out what analyzers were where, what tests were doing what, which laboratories were putting this test through. Randox helped with all that, and it didn't take long before we got the 13 hub sites set up. Any problems that we have, like I say, we've got plenty of support and contact to get in touch, even to the point that when they shut down for 2 weeks, they make sure that there's people still around should you 24/7 go down while they're off for Christmas. So from my own personal perspective, I can't fault the program at all. The multiple reports, as I said, they satisfy all accreditation requirements. You can manipulate the data through the ability to export directly into Microsoft Excel, which if you're any good with Excel, you can then pivot and do what you need to do. What I have found with the team at Randox as well is that if I am working on the system and I think of an improvement idea, they're very open to me dropping them an email and saying I think this could be done better, and they will generally look at the feasibility and then try and work out how it can be applied into updates with great regularity, especially if it's something that's been highlighted by multiple other sites. So I know some NHS sites and things like that. Obviously, if there's 5 or 6 different sites all saying we think this could be improved by doing this, they will generally put it in place. As I said, it links in very well with Randox materials as it's designed to do for IQC. They pre-populate the lot numbers. It just means that the mapping requires setting, and I mean generally if you're struggling with your mapping, again QC operations team will help you with that. The Randox QC, as I said, non-Randox QC, as I said, can be set up using a custom menu, and again it's fairly simple to do. And then yeah, support, quick email generally results in advice being sent back to me with screenshots showing me what needs doing. Overall, I'd just say that I found working with Randox is productive partnership, both for me personally and for the company. I'm looking forward to the amalgamation of the EQA recast schemes with 24/7, which they keep saying is coming in the future. I've no doubt one day it will, and if it works like this, it'll be a pleasure.